That's me. You're probably wondering how I got here, spinning aimlessly back across track, mid-pack, in a qualifying race to the qualifying series, into the one sports car esports competition we have these days on iRacing. Let me get you up to speed. The Porsche Esports Supercup finally returns for 2026, and the steps for qualifying in are a little bit different this year. There are multiple routes of entry, but it's the first time that nobody's retained their spot from the previous year, and we all have to qualify in. This is the first time since 2017 that I'm trying to qualify in for an iRacing World Championship, so I am a little bit rusty to all of this. We have two stages of qualifying. The qualifiers, either through the Porsche Esports Carrera Cup GB, which I finished 9th in, so I didn't get in through that, or the Porsche Esports Carrera Cup North America, and I don't have an American or Canadian or Mexican passport, so I don't get in through that. The other option was the Porsche Esports Endurance Trophy Nurburgring, and I didn't know that series existed until it was finished. Beyond that, then, we've got the Global Open Qualifiers. That's what this series will focus on, where everyone has a shot, 4 races a week, 4 weeks, and your best result will count towards then qualifying through into your region. 4 regions are Europe, Americas, Asia Pacific, Middle East and Africa. 32 drivers in total will progress into each of those, and then the top 8 from each region then qualifies into the Porsche Esports Super Cup that starts in September. This year we're condensed down into just 5 rounds for that to crown our champion of the world and potentially then be backed by Porsche into a real world venture. Exciting times. I mentioned the GB series of the Porsche Esports Carrera Cup. Only the top 3 from that series qualify into the Europe Regional Series. I was a paltry P9, so here I am slugging it out in the Global Open Qualifiers. I had a rough idea of how I wanted to put this particular video together before the start of this season, but all ideas went out the window once I got stuck in. You'll see why pretty quickly here. So let's get stuck in. Once I signed up for the first race and saw that I was the number 23 car, I knew that it wasn't going to be a cruise by any means. The first 10k off I've ever been a part of, and not the last in this series either. Race 1, a bit of a meh quali, but it ended up being basically at the back in P29, which was a little bit of a surprise. I wasn't expecting to be quite so far back, but quite clearly I had missed the mark. First lap and a half was absolute carnage, as you would sort of expect in a first race of a season kind of thing that we've got going on here. I end up behind Noah Eder, which doesn't mean much now, but we see lots of Noah through the rest of these races. The race kept being pretty spicy all the way up to lap 6. Lucas Camba throttles up in my attempt to not turn him, and I drop it on the left of the column, collecting one other person for my troubles. The race basically over, ended P22, which became P21 because Dane Warren picked up a penalty. Not exactly an ideal start here. Second race at Spa, and it was the car number 28, which meant that I very nearly didn't make top split. I blew the first qualifying lap, and the second lap kind of fell apart in the second half of it, and as a result I was 6/10 off the pace once again. Into lap 1, carnage again, and coming up the Camel Straight I hip checked Dan Moore into a DNF in the aftermath. Sorry Dan on that one, I just didn't know that you were there on my left. Lap 2, slowdowns caused things to get congested once again. I caught a bump, really weird out of Stavolo, and then into Blanchimont. Moritz feeds me off into the slowdown, and that puts me back to the back again. Lap 9, Michael Janney dies, and I get back to the group ahead, but the race is effectively done, and I'm cruising around fighting for no meaningful positions. Lap 10 sums up the whole thing. A lot happened, and yet nothing came of it. I picked up a dumb slowdown last lap under no pressure and dropped 2 spots. P24, and things are looking bleak. After a pretty bruising Wednesday, Saturday is a new day and a new opportunity to try and score some points. Saturday also brings a slightly lower strength of field, as some have plenty of points on the board, and I put some extra work in during the days in between to try and understand the lack of speed. I found very little, but pressed on hoping I could just execute a good Q lap and see where I would shake out. However, once again, I did not do that, my banker being the lap that I put down as I clumsily picked up the Radeon slowdown, and half a second off pole is where I ended up. It's technically an improvement, but this was again well short of where I knew I could be, but it is P19. There are 3 certainties in life: death, taxes, and lap 1 Spa carnage in top split. I get through cleanly for once and pick up the spots of Lucas and Nicholas. At this point I was desperate for some sort of solid result, and so the remit for this race was to just get something half decent on the board. No heroics needed. It was quite quiet until lap 11 as former champion Diogo Pinto recovers from his slowdown and closes in, and I take my time as I try and get ahead of Lishka. I get crossover and fed wide into Ravage, losing that battle. That's how the race ended. 16th isn't that good, but it's less bad than the other races, and mid-pack points gives me at least something to cling on to. The final race at Spa, 9.2k strength of field and the number 14 car. It's a decent chance for me to get points, as a lot of the top guys have definitely grabbed their points now and they're being replaced by guys who were in second split, and that in theory I should be able to do better against. I'm still however fighting every corner to get the car to go exactly where I ask it to. At no point have I felt at one with this, and that costs you time every single corner. Some small errors on the lap, largely just from not fully committing to the middle of the lap, add up to 3.5 tenths off pace. It's a step in the right direction, but still only P15. The race, however, goes a little bit like this. I'll not elaborate too much more on that, but I wasn't exactly a happy camper, and so effectively a DNF. All in all, not exactly a good start to things. I need to get into the top 26 in Europe to qualify in for the regional series, and after week 1 I am down in 49th. I love the number, but it's not exactly a position that I want to be in. First race at Sebring brings us back to 10k strength of fields. I was sick during this week and showed up with a poor qualifying strat of basically just prioritising lap 2 rather than trying to get the tyres working for lap 1 and trying to have 2 stabs at it. I had thought that with the hot track temperatures that warming the tyres wasn't needed and my testing wasn't super conclusive, but as it turns out, as per usual, I was wrong. There's no point in having banker laps anyway if your banker is back of the field. So lap 1 in Q, and sure enough I don't have enough temp in the tyre and I understeer wide. Lap 2 ends up being a bit off the mark everywhere, back to being 0.5 off, back at the grid once again. I get a good start, make progress, but get biffed back to the back again halfway through lap 1. I guess this is karma for hitting Dana Moore back at Spa. Wreck avoidance is needed once again though out of Tower Bend, and I end up back just outside the top 20, but it's still not really the position that I want to be in. The race goes quiet until lap 6, and it's hard to make moves in a train without taking a huge risk. I end up pulling a good move on Kessel, but again this isn't for strong points, so I'm just trying to enjoy the race and learn what I can at this point. A lap later I try the same move on hand, it doesn't work, and then Kessel understeers into me and I'm half spun. I get back ahead of Kessel after battling ahead brings me back into the mix, but it's pretty stretched out now, and so I decide to battle with whoever's around me, pulling a robust move back again on hand. My rears aren't in good shape though, and I don't do a good job of pulling away from the cars behind or catch a damaged Noah Eder in front. I did mention that we'd see much more of Noah again. End result, P21. 10k soft on the nose for race 2, car number 24, so again we're sort of expected to be a little bit further towards the back here. I catch the curb badly in T11 of all places for the first time all week, which is classic qualifying things where random things just pop up kind of out of nowhere and I have to rely on lap 2. As I'm watching these quali laps back, it's so clear to me that I have no trust in what I'm trying to do. There aren't many corners that are driven positively here, and it adds up everywhere again. P25 and back to the gulag we go. There's a big shunt at the start that I was able to avoid, and again 9 from my starting position, and into a spot that felt maybe a bit more accurate for my raw speed. Dane Warren gets tipped around at the Le Mans complex, and there's another incident on lap 3 coming off of T1 that I was able to avoid, so we're looking up for once. However, my pace simply wasn't good enough. Prevost overtakes into the hairpin on lap 5 and is able to creep away from me, and I'm sat there sort of exasperated at the lack of performance that I have and the mistakes that I'm making. I pushed wide in Sunset in lap 7 and tagged the wall, losing spots to Ola and Lerner. Lap 10 and there's a kerfuffle ahead, which seems promising, but later in the lap I lose ground to Espes off of a checkup, and I didn't take too kindly to him feeding me wide, so I lobbed him the next corner. I kind of had enough of people thinking they can get away with that sort of move, and it's not the last time that I felt that I had to start swinging back at people. Unfortunately, the pace didn't improve any. Fisher moved past a couple of laps later, and then coming into sunset on the penultimate lap, Kadlacek got so tight under my rear wing that I actually got aero loose for the first time in this car and lost a spot to both him and Espes. A demoralising race, and once again I finished a Wednesday needing major improvements for Saturday. P17 the end result. Alright. Into Saturday, 8.3k strength of field in car number 9. Saturday is my day of opportunity. It's almost like being in split 1.5. A decent chunk of the fast guys from top split aren't racing and already get the focus on the next week, and a lot of the second split guys get thrust forward therefore into top split. I again made changes to my approach for the second half of the week and get stuck into qualifying, and I stuffed T1 again on lap 1, and I have to rely once again on my second lap. I stuffed that too, really badly actually, but the weaker competition this time around puts me thankfully in P11. One time I can still work from there. We just about survived the start in the same place as I started for once. A bit of a scrap with Huang pulled me away from the group ahead, but I defend hard, confident that I could catch if I broke free. Lap 4 and I set the lesser spotted fastest lap of the race with minimal slipstream ahead. A welcome boost to my battered confidence, but it showed that the work that I put in after the Wednesday races wasn't for absolutely nothing. It kicks off from 5th on back and I tag onto the back of the train. Eder and Fisher go side by side for what felt like an eternity and I can't find a way through. The guys that I dropped earlier have now caught up and the lead cars of the train I just latched onto had now pulled away. Things stay chill from here until lap 10 where it all kicks off again, but no sensible opportunities rose. I'm struggling to stay patient here. I'm looking for as many opportunities as possible to try and score some big points because this is the day where I really need to score points. Lap 13, Eder tries a move on Lishka and my eyes light up as I try to cut under and get a run. I don't get completely clear and it's 3 wide into a pitch point and I get tipped round. Solid points firmly in the bin. I decide that David Williams is my punching bag for the end of the race and I take 2 goes at the lob, getting it right second time. Woods gets turned around on the last lap as well, so I at least salvage a couple more positions, but it's only P15 and it's not really enough to move the needle. Bring race 4, and this race absolutely has to go well if I have any chance of making it through into regionals. I knew that the big points get scored earlier in the season and I've not scored anything of note yet. If I don't get a result here, then there's next to no chance of making it through. 7.9k, car number 6, this was my opportunity. The wind was blowing in a different direction and at quite some force, which makes things challenging and you have to adapt pretty quickly to make sure you aren't under or over driving every corner. 30 kph wind speed doesn't sound like a massive amount, but it can significantly change where you brake and the balance of the car throughout the corner. That's so wide. My lap 1 was okay until I went extra wide at sunset, the wind pushing heavily into that corner. Then lap 2, I get the exit at T5 wrong and lose chunks there. The rest of the lap is just about passable and I get myself into the mix. P3, a couple of tenths off pole. A clean start up front, not a lot to report. Moretto gets into 4th behind me and puts plenty of pressure on, eventually sending me on lap 2 into sunset, and he then proceeds to act as a rear gunner to his teammate Prevost ahead. This is where the race is a bit different to all of the others so far. Everyone needs points, but everyone is getting them from this race, so there's minimal incentive to fight. Eder's slightly faster than me behind, mainly because I keep making braking errors, and eventually I make one mistake too many with him overtaking on lap 12 into T1 with a solid lunge. I let him go thinking he might fight with the guys ahead, but we all towed the line and finished in that order. I got 5th, and with that enough points to warrant continuing the following week. Suzuka is one of my favourites and I usually go alright here. Confidence isn't crazily high because in practice for this week I found exactly no lap time beyond my first 45 minutes of practice. I do however put down a decent quality lap for where I am right now with no glaring errors. However, in a field this competitive it's only good enough for P15 and I will have to scrap from here. The opening lap is hectic. I lose a spot to Ariel in the S section, then he picks up a slowdown in Degner 1 and causes all sorts of mayhem. We get sorted out by the time we get to Spoon, largely in the same place that we started.
Oh, for God's sake.
I get a terrible bounce off the inside curb of the chicane at the end of the lap. The run through the first 3 corners were a bit close for comfort with Noah, but we live to fight another day. Biko gets spun around in the hairpin and I return back to 15th. Race trim pace was average at best, though with no damage. Ola and Iglesias ahead both did have damage and I wasn't necessarily eating into them. In fact, the chasing group were slowly closing in on me. Lap 10, I make an actual overtake on Ola into T1 and hope to try and pull away, with Biko overtaking soon after. I only had to hang on for 5 laps, but I guess I cooked my rears once again. and so I had very little to defend with once he got there. I didn't fight it hard. I knew 14th or 15th would probably not be enough for points for what I needed anyway, so no point stacking it into the wall, no point crashing into anyone. P15 in the end, only 235 points though, so I would need to improve significantly upon that. Another solid Q lap for race 2, but strangely P8 even in this strength of field. It didn't feel like a worldie of a qualifying lap, but it was relatively my best effort so far. So the positive is that reasonable performance is lurking in there somewhere, but I don't always know why it comes and goes. Probably something that you guys all experience at some point. I got a great launch and picked up P7 immediately from Iglesias. It's nice being further forward in these races. It's a little bit more chilled out at the start. Only a little bit though. We get through lap 1 in one piece, but my pace and race trim is again a weakness, and I do my finest Jarno Trulli impersonation, backing up everyone and their auntie as the top 6 breeze away. I'm in a tricky spot where I do desperately need to get points on the board, but I can't throw away a great opportunity for reasonably good points as it stands. I'm consistently 3/10 off the ultimate pace, and finally lose slipstream from the cars ahead on lap 9, which is exactly when Iglesias, Moretto and Johansson all take advantage of my woeful pace at the end of lap 9 and into lap 10. I've cooked my tyres again and create a new train to head, taking a performance off track to hold off Casabon, which caused issues behind. And Moretto then pulled a big move on Iglesias to bring me back into the picture. Iglesias then picks up a slowdown on the inside of 130R and I get back into 9th, but I'm on the back foot again into the final sector of the final lap and have to defend against Iglesias once more, this time barely holding on to P9. It's decent points to get me into the mix for the top 26, but these performances do need to improve at some point.
Oh no, I didn't mean to have checking that like that.
8.4k soft, number 9 car, a decent opportunity to try and score some big points, but in qualifying I absolutely stuffed it, and that's on both laps, and therefore ended up P17, a whopping 6/10 off pole position. Yeah, not great. The start was interesting, but from that far back I saw it as a bit of a free hit, knowing I'd need to probably score P5 or P6 to move my points total further forward. However, I picked up damage in the checkup in the hairpin on lap 1, which hindered me for the rest of the race. Only Torlashi ahead of me had more damage, and therefore he was a little bit of a sitting duck, and the one highlight of my race was a double move into T1 trying to profit from that, but it was only for P13. I spent the rest of the race after that kind of in no man's land, just podcasting more than anything at that point.
Let's go Cody, let's go Cody. Yes.
Final race on Saturday. This is the sort of race that I really need to take advantage of, with a lot of the super fast guys not racing. However, once again, I didn't put a great lap down, and it was nearly half a second off of McKeown's pole lap, which was very, very impressive. P9 in a race where a top 5 was very possible isn't exactly what I needed. I tried to go super aggressive at the start to try and make positions, a couple of those however coming from committing to a move on Lishka and knocking him wide into Christensen. Technically on me, I think I would have been fine had Lishka not tried to cover the inside as late as he did, when I'd already committed, but I'd no back out plan, and so the contact was inevitable. At that point though, it was 3 positions gained, and P6 would actually be enough to improve my points tally for the week. Unfortunately, I drove really badly from this position and came under pressure from Nur behind, eventually getting frustrated in my attempts to hold on, and I blew spots as well to Phelps and Christensen. Back to where I started in P9, and without the pace required to put anyone under pressure, that's exactly where I finish, and that is an opportunity gone begging. I was on the outside looking in to make it to regionals for the last week. 29th going into it and not entirely in control of the outcome, as there were some second splitters who could score good points before they would be bumped up to top split later in the week. It's worth mentioning this because in the earlier weeks they could rack up really big points much more comfortably than I could in the lower splits due to how the system works. Winning a second split of around 8k is worth the same points as a top 5 in a 10k top split, for example. And I know I'd find it significantly easier to get a result in an 8k soft than a 10k one. But these are the quirks of the system, and I just have to crack on. I knew I'd need north of 300 points, which would be a P8 or P9 in one of those big Wednesday races, or something much better than that when the soft dies down on a Saturday. I didn't prep how I wanted to for the Wednesday races and knew that I'd probably have to rely on Saturday to get the job done. Nurburgring is not a track I enjoy or go well at historically, but now wasn't the time to bring out the excuses. I just had to get the job done. Lap 2 was the one for me in qualifying, and despite putting a solid first half of the lap down, the rest fell apart pretty badly, kind of going back to Spa where I was sort of struggling there. 17th was all I could muster, and I'd need a minor miracle at a track notoriously difficult to overtake on to get those points in race 1. The opening sector, as it always is in the mid-pack, was wild. I knew I had to get stuck in, but I couldn't find the right openings, and I made no progress whilst also losing touch completely of a position higher than 14th. We brawl like our lives depended on it, and I fade Lucas Camba off the road in the melee. Normally I'd feel really bad about this, but Lucas has a history of doing this to everyone around him, and is a big fan of my cornering someone. And I'm very much done with people thinking that I'll take bad moves lying down. So I've started throwing hands back recently. It is what it is. I'd rather race people completely fair and clean, but I get to do that less often it seems in 2026, and I'm just adapting to my environment. The race settles down a bit after that. I'm not fast in certain sections of the track, but the pace isn't overall that bad when I'm not having to defend against woods behind. But he gets a slowdown in lap 7 behind me, as Hiliaho gets one ahead, and I pop forward a position. The group ahead start fighting, and I close in, but despite the ebb and flow of this, it doesn't present any clear opportunities, and 14th is still nowhere close to where I need to be, so I settle in and bring it home. 9.7k, and this was the last time that we would see us off anywhere near this big, as Saturday's races would end up being quite quiet. It would have been nice to a little bit more speed under me, but with an okay-ish lap, it was only good enough for 17th. I get a good launch down to T1 and decide to commit around the outside. However... No! God damn it. I was so close to getting the whole race effectively over. Roger gets fed to the back with me, and he needs points about as much as I do, so whilst I'm slightly relieved to see someone who I need to not score big points, not scoring those big points, I quite like Roger. He's always been good with me, and he often races fair and clean, so I don't feel amazing to see him in the mire with me here. Pack strings out back towards us, but there's nothing of great value to fight for, so it's more learning and prep at this point, getting ready for Saturday. Pablo Espez is another one who needs strong points, and I see him pulling over to the side with his race ruined. So as my day hasn't gone well, it's not going amazingly for others. We end up having a pretty fun brawl at the back before catching Francisco Camilo. This is where the race descends into total chaos. He drives into Lishka, then he drives into me, picks himself up a slowdown, and I end up retrieving the spot back from Henry Moore. Interesting. I run out of ability half a lap later though, and get a slowdown of my own. Settled for a couple of laps before Moore goes lawnmowering. I try and race Camilo fair, but he's driven into me yet again into T3 and the bottom hairpin on lap 14. All of our races are in the bin at this point, and so into T1 a lap later I decide to pull this move off. Is it the rudest move of my life? Probably. Would I do it again under those circumstances? Also probably. Much to my surprise, I didn't get a receipt for that. P23 or whatever it was in the end. I'm not necessarily super proud of all of this, but this series and trying to qualify in for a series like this does bring out the absolute worst in pretty much everyone, including myself, so I'll take my lumps for what it's worth. Saturday, however, would be my judgment day. Nurburgring Race 3. This would be a golden opportunity to score good points that would hopefully secure my spot in the regional series. 7.7k is a good enough strength of field, and if I do a respectable job, I should improve significantly on the mediocre 228 points that I'd accrued so far this week. A slowdown penalty though on lap 1 in qualifying wasn't part of the plan, so I desperately needed to get something acceptable on the board. Understeer again at the bottom hairpin on lap 2 undid a solid start to the lap, and it ended up being a carbon copy almost of race 1. The less competitive field though meant it was P8 rather than P17 this time. I had my sparring power, Noah Eder one spot behind, Roger in P11, Lishka up in P4 at a crucial time for him, though any respectable result would actually get him in. To give context, Noah hadn't raced yet this week, but 10 points separated us going into the week. Roger was 17 ahead of me, at the start of the week, but was running out of time to put a good score down. There are also drivers like Spiezio and Yolkin who could pop up with big points too. Gilbert and Esbets, as it turned out, weren't racing on Saturday and so ended up not playing a role, but I wasn't to know that at that point. Also, I didn't know exactly what each position would be worth and who I definitely needed to be in each race. But of course, as it turned out, I was exactly where I needed to be, ahead of Noah and ahead of Roger. My launch was good again, but Guman Kim appearing for the first time all season feeds me wide, opening an opportunity for Eder to get by the pair of us. I knew I had to strike back immediately and pulled a forceful move on Kim to reclaim 8th, but Noah was ahead and I needed to change that. Much of the rest of the first half of the race from my side wasn't good. Pace was poor, but I felt it was purely down to mistakes rather than just not having it in me. I knew if I could knuckle down and stop making these errors, there might still be a chance. But I would need to improve and Noah would need to regress. By lap 9 things were looking a bit better and I was creeping back towards Noah 1/10 at a time, and by lap 11 I was actually in striking range. Lap 13, Roger spins out of the race and it crept into my mind that maybe I don't necessarily need to overtake Noah and protect P8, thinking that that would be enough for sure against guys like Spiezio and Yolkin. Spoiler alert, that actually wouldn't be the case, so getting P7 now was actually the thing that I needed. Getting closer to the end of the race, I can see Noah struggling more and more with his rear tyres. Coming into the last chicane though, on the final lap, it's not looking great. And then...
Come on.
Somehow I did enough. Just. Barely. I came back for race 4, but it was only a 5.5k strength of field, but that didn't mean that it couldn't change things. A top 2 for Roger would bring him into play. A top 5 for Yolkin would have brought him into play, and Spiezio needed a top 10, I believe it was. Spiezio actually did enough with P8 to creep in and knock Noah out, Roger only finishing behind me in P5. So it looked like I was basically the last man in, or so it seemed. Haiti Noah Mamasi, as it turned out, re-registered for the Americas region as he has a Canadian passport. So he shifts over there, which is lucky for him, and Noah gets his slot as last man in. If the last lap battle in race 3 at Nurburgring had gone the wrong way and Kim and Eder had both beaten me out, then I would have ended up with only 1 point of an advantage over Roger going into that last race, and that race definitely then would have been quite different. But all ifs, buts and maybes, I did just about enough to qualify for the European Regional Series. Thanks for watching. I wish I had a bunch of key takeaways to give you that may help you in your sim racing journey and to pass on some sort of knowledge or wisdom, but all I can offer at this point is that stubbornness and perseverance go an alarmingly long way in this. I didn't qualify by showing great skill or nous, just a total refusal to fail at this task. And I guess that's quite a powerful thing to have. I may not have the raw speed that I did a few years ago, and it does put me in challenging positions now, but I don't know how to give up with sim racing, and I suppose it's challenging to beat someone who refuses to be beat. Until next time.